Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose. The man who rules the world runs into the irresistible force of a man with nothing to lose in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get the regular and variant editions of John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose on Amazon.com today. Now available in paperback and e-reader. E-Steam Council Vacation. Hell's aspiring angel takes on a social justice, social media mob looking to cancel her in this all-new E-Steam series adventure. Get E-Steam Council Vacation in paperback and e-readers today. President Biden and the White House are calling for sanctuary cities to cooperate with Immigration's Customs and Enforcement in dealing with individuals who are migrants who allegedly commit crimes. Now, according to a Fox News report, President Biden and the White House are calling for all of those sanctuary cities that are primarily in blue areas like New York to start cooperating with Immigration's Customs and Enforcement in handing over individuals who commit crimes in these sanctuary cities. Now, the policy that was established by local municipalities like New York under former Mayor Bill de Blasio was for these cities to not cooperate with Immigration's Customs and Enforcement in dealing with individuals who entered the country illegally if they possibly committed a crime. Now, under Bill de Blasio, he believed that if we were to cooperate with the federal government, this would lead to these individuals allegedly being discriminated against. However, in the aftermath of the migrant crisis established by New York Mayor Eric Adams and in other blue cities, many of these municipalities are finding themselves completely overwhelmed, and this law that was established by people like Bill de Blasio in these sanctuary cities are hampering efforts to deal with a crime wave that has gotten out of control ever since those municipalities that established themselves as sanctuary cities have decided to bring these migrants into these areas. And as they've brought migrants into their sanctuary cities, those migrants, some of them have turned those sanctuaries into an asylum, and these inmates running the asylum have created chaos with their criminal activity, like here in New York, where migrants allegedly assaulted police officers as they were looking to disperse a crowd, and another migrant allegedly participated in a series of shootings, including one that he did while he was allegedly shoplifting at a JD Sports store in Times Square. And all of these criminal activities have created a publicity backlash as related to the ongoing migrant crisis for many of these blue politicians who wanted to originally make the excuse that the sanctuary city laws tied their hands. Because that was the statement that New York Mayor Eric Adams made about a week ago regarding getting rid of the sanctuary city laws. And he said that because these laws were established by former Mayor Bill de Blasio, he could do absolutely nothing about these laws. And even as he said he couldn't do anything about those laws 2 weeks ago, he then a week later started to reverse his position, saying that he wanted to go out and finally end the sanctuary city laws, which he believed were tying his hands. And now we have the White House coming out and calling for these cities to start cooperating with ICE, even though these unconstitutional laws are in place. Now, this White House call basically proves a point that I made in a previous video about the solution to dealing with these unconstitutional sanctuary city laws, because here we have the White House and Joe Biden using the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution to ask these so-called sanctuary cities to cooperate with ICE. Now, these cities could basically cooperate with ICE because every other city that doesn't have a sanctuary city law is obligated to do this under the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution. And because they are obligated under the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution to cooperate with federal agencies, they have to follow that law. But these local municipalities in these blue states that say that they are sanctuary cities, they say they can't do this. However, the Constitution clearly states that we have a supremacy clause under the Constitution, which says that federal supersedes state. And this sanctuary city law is unconstitutional because what it does is it violates the supremacy clause of the Constitution, preventing federal agencies from being able to do their work effectively in local municipalities. And that's why this sanctuary city law could easily be overturned. However, many of the blue politicians don't want to overturn these laws because overturning these laws would basically prove a point that these sanctuary city policies are a complete failure as related to legality, and would basically show how incompetent that the blue politicians were when they wrote these laws. And that basically is also being proven by these cities being overrun by migrants who do not want to follow the laws of the city that they are staying in because they violated federal laws. And since they were allowed to violate federal laws, they believe they can go out here and violate all of these local laws. And all of this flies over the heads of these politicians in the blue party as they try to save face as related to this entire situation. Now, they're trying to save face as related to this situation as their cities go out here and implode in chaos from many of these people who entered the country illegally, causing all of this crime and violence. And now the White House finally wants to acknowledge that they really have a problem. And the reason why they want to acknowledge they have a problem mainly is because it's an election year. And since it's an election year, they want to acknowledge they have a problem because they clearly see how this is negatively impacting Joe Biden's approval ratings on the national level, and is further impacting many of these politicians like Kathy Hochul and Eric Adams on the state and local level, because most people really are not being a fan of these sanctuary cities now that we actually see them in place, now that we see that the theory has been disproven as related to providing sanctuary for migrants in local cities with state and local resources being overwhelmed. Now, many of these politicians want to call for these sanctuary cities to cooperate with ICE, when in actuality they could have been cooperating with ICE from minute one had they gotten out of their feelings regarding Donald Trump. Had they gotten out of their feelings, they could have easily been cooperating with Greg Abbott as related to solving this situation. Everybody could have been coming together. Unfortunately, because people were so caught up in their polarized feelings about Donald Trump and saying that he was a racist and ICE as a government agency was racist. Again, an illogical statement, because how can a government agency that is designed to protect the health, safety, and welfare of American citizens and those who enter the country illegally be racist? Critical question I would have to ask Joe Biden and the members of the Blue Party who held on to what they would call, what I call a far left, but some would call a woke idea of dealing with ICE and hampering ICE from being able to do its job. And with ICE unable to do its job in many of these sanctuary cities, again, many of these sanctuary cities have turned into an insane asylum where all of the inmates are looking to rule and creating a fiefdom filled with chaos and crime. And as that crime wave has just made the quality of life in a city like New York as miserable, as even worse than the dark days of the 70s with the heroin epidemic and the 80s and the early 90s with the crack epidemic, where we see squalid conditions and a doubling of the homeless population. Now we finally see the White House finally saying something. And again, what they're saying is for these cities to cooperate. But if these cities are cooperating with ICE, then that basically invalidates that entire sanctuary city law. And it invalidates that sanctuary city law because it's basically the executive branch basically proving the point that this law was unconstitutional, because if the federal branch is telling all of these local municipalities to cooperate with ICE, it's basically invalidating an unconstitutional law, a law that is unconstitutional, but because Americans have too much pride, they don't want to admit that this law is a failure on the level of prohibition, and a failure that basically would embarrass all of the members of the Blue Party and basically guarantee that they possibly would lose the next election. That's what conceding that this whole sanctuary city policy is all about. A bunch of proud politicians who don't want to admit that this policy is a failure, even though we clearly see the failure of it in real time, because you cannot take care of all of people who enter a country illegally, provide them with benefits, and enable their dysfunctional behavior, because when you enable dysfunctional behavior, what you do is get more of it, and that's what we're getting with the migrant crisis, which is coming in an election year, and that's the main reason why we see Joe Biden telling all of these cities to cooperate with ICE, because Joe Biden realizes that he's already losing a lot of votes, not only from the residents of these cities, but from key demographics like black voters, like those here in New York and Chicago, who see themselves being pushed to the back of the line as these migrants who enter the country illegally are given tangible benefits in the form of debit cards and being able to stay in places better than many working New Yorkers and people in places like Chicago. Many of those voters feel alienated by Joe Biden and his policies that set off the migrant crisis nationally, and locally they're already alienated from the cream of wheat man Eric Adams, who basically cooked up this scheme to virtue signal here in New York. And state politicians like Kathy Hochul are also feeling it, and so will members of the city council like Adrian Adams, who wants to hold on to this policy, even though the entire Blue Party is trying to walk back these policies that they implemented that created this migrant crisis chaos. And the White House now calling for the sanctuary cities to cooperate is a major L as related to what this Fox News report is presenting, because if they're calling for the sanctuary cities to cooperate with ICE, then it basically is them admitting that the sanctuary city laws are a failure, and with them being a failure, they basically have handed over the next election, because while they're looking to do damage control on this migrant crisis, they've basically proven that they're incompetent and incapable of administering a government, because if they had secured the border, we wouldn't have this migrant crisis. And it basically, on the local level, has shown that these sanctuary cities, this theory that was made up by political nerds and far left ideologues, in reality doesn't work. And it shows that the sanctuary city is a concept that needs to be repealed. And these laws, as related to sanctuary city, we now have all these politicians looking to walk back on this whole policy now that their jobs are on the line. And that really shows us we need to really think critically about who we pick and elect, because the people that we pick seem to not know what they're doing, and we need to be more careful about who we pick for these offices to make sure that they don't go out here and create insane policies like sanctuary cities that give these migrants better benefits than American citizens and put Americans last. I mean, with Joe Biden basically conceding on this position, he realizes that this is, again, him trying to minimize an L that basically is here and being proven as related to my points, again, about these sanctuary cities, because if the White House is calling for the cities to cooperate with ICE, and you have many people in cities like Chicago sitting there saying they don't want these policies and want to vote them off, then it's clear that these unconstitutional laws may be gone sooner rather than later. Now, If you want to pick up some of my books on the SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the Steam series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my vampire novel Eternal Night, or my Black Sorority novel The Thetis, you can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, and Target. And if you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS, All About the Goddess. The Goddess Next Door bears all in the art studio to catch a campus stalker in this action-packed ISIS series mystery. Get your copy of ISIS, All About the Goddess in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.